Hello, my name's Rachel and welcome back to the channel. So in today's video, I will be going through 5 investing books that could make a huge difference to your financial situation and eventually make you rich. So in each of these books, the different finance experts have covered lots of different topics. Some of it is very simple, and then there is some more complex ideas included in this video as well. I'll put timestamps in the video, so if you don't like the sound of a certain book, you can skip through to the next one. And then at the end of the video, I'll be taking all the information together because there is a lot of information in all the different books that actually crosses over. So I'll be taking that information that crosses over and really creating a step-by-step guide to investing at the end of this video. So I've read a lot of different finance and investing books over the years that I have been investing, but the 5 that have made the shortlist for this video are The Barefoot Investor, The Little Book of Common Sense Investing, 4 Pillars of Investing, How to Own the World, and The Psychology of Money. So let's get started. So starting out with The Barefoot Investor, this is a step-by-step guide to getting you started with investing. At the beginning of this book, it explains that research has shown the feeling of powerlessness associated with a poor financial situation is actually not dissimilar to physical torture. It's imperative to learn self-discipline and have a financial safety net to fall back on. So this book explains that it's important to have financial discipline and to have a safety net or emergency fund to fall back on before you start investing. So once you've got rid of all of your debt and cut up your credit cards, the author Scott Pape goes on to say what you should be investing in is index funds. And this is information that we hear time and time again, and it is information that we're getting from a lot of the different books. He suggests that you don't want to try and beat the market, but instead try to meet market gains. He actually includes some information here on what Warren Buffett plans to do when he passes away. When he leaves his money to his wife, he's saying that 90% of that money will be put into index funds. So this piece of information segues perfectly into my next book, which is The Little Book of Common Sense Investing. So this was written by John C. Bogle, who was the founder of Vanguard. This is a small but mighty book, and it really highlights the importance of investing in index funds, or investing in ETFs, or investing in passive funds, as they are sometimes called as well. This book argues that actively managed funds will generate significantly less profit for you than a passive, low-cost index fund or ETF. And he agrees with the Barefoot Investor here that what you should really be looking at is the cost. So just go for a low cost ETF. Okay, so now you've got an idea of what you should be investing in. It's really important to get an idea of how the market has performed historically, and that is where the 4 pillars of investing comes in. So this book really focuses on mastering and understanding financial history as a way to perform better as an investor. So obviously on so many financial documents, you will see things like past performance isn't indicative of future performance, and that is certainly the case. However, it is really important to have an understanding of historical performance when choosing future investments. This is largely because the same mania, bubbles, and crashes have repeated again and again and again across generations. So if you are a long-term investor and you see yourself investing for a long way into the future, for example, for your pension, then you are likely to be investing at some point in a market crash. The book explains that the cycle is clear: displacement, easy money, amnesia, euphoria, prices detach from the reality as greed takes over. Historian Charles Kindleberger wisely observed that nothing is so disturbing to one's well-being as to see a friend get rich. The mania feeds on itself until the fuel is borrowed, cash is exhausted, then collapses. In this way, the boom and bust cycle repeats itself across centuries, assets, and currencies. And the thing is, humans are not rational. So a fundamental assumption of economics is that people behave rationally in their own self-interest when making financial decisions. Now that is not the case. Abundant evidence proves differently, and often irrational behavior will take over when investments aren't performing as you'd expect them to. We often treasure our wins and bury our losses. We might be desperate to talk about a stock or ETF that has performed exceptionally well, and maybe bury the ones that haven't performed as well underneath the rug. So in this book, The 4 Pillars of Investing, as well as focusing on the historical performance of certain financial assets, he really starts to move over and talk about humans' irrationality, and also talks about the psychology of the mind when it comes to investing, which brings me perfectly to my very next book, The Psychology of Money. Financial decision making is a lot messier in real life than it is in financial textbooks. The average low-income household in the United States spends $411 on lottery tickets tickets every year. At the same time, around 40% of all households struggle to find $400 in an emergency. Unsurprisingly, this 40% is made up of the same low-income households who spend just over $400 on lottery tickets. So obviously this doesn't make much financial sense. However, people often behave in a way that doesn't make very much financial sense when it comes to investing and saving. The same goes for investment choices, which are often driven by people's formative experience of the economy in early adulthood, rather than the informed appraisals of current market conditions. Put simply, financial decisions are heavily entwined with psychological factors. So from these 4 books, we now have a really good picture of how we should start investing. We should remove all debt, have an emergency fund, think about investing in ETFs or index funds. We need to have a good idea of how the market has performed historically so that we don't overreact when there are dips in the market. And we also have to have a good idea of our own psychology when it comes to money so that we can put a foolproof plan in place and not make rash decisions when things get difficult. But you might be asking me, where is the money coming from to invest? And that is a very good question, and that is a question that can be answered by our next book, which is How to Own the World by Andrew Craig. So he explains that obviously you need to create financial surplus to be able to start investing. And interestingly, in the book, he explains that self-storage is one of the biggest growing industries in the book at the moment. But what does this have to do with investing? He explains that the average Briton has more than a ton of unwanted possessions. If you think about some of the useless stuff that you've purchased, it may surprise you how much you could have actually invested instead. So in this book, he does explain that there are some different methods that you can use to have surplus money to invest. But one of these points that he likes to make is just stop buying all the stupid stuff that you don't even need in the first place and put that money aside on a direct debit and start investing it into, for example, an investment ISA, or start putting it into your pension instead. So there is a much bigger overarching message in this book, and it is that you should be owning a globally diverse portfolio, and he calls that owning the world. So you could potentially look at investing in something like an all-world ETF, which would be globally diverse. So what I found particularly interesting about these books is although they are presented in very different ways, the authors are from different countries, they actually had a huge amount of crossover within them, despite them being written decades apart or from authors from different countries. So if I was to distill all of the advice down from all of these 5 different books, there would be a few simple steps that you should follow to get started with investing and potentially get rich investing. Now those steps are to clear debt and set up an emergency fund. The emergency fund will allow you to have a buffer of money to fall back on if you need it, and it will also stop you pulling out money from the markets if they are performing badly, because we all know it's better to ride out those dips and troughs in the market rather than pulling your money out if it looks like the market is crashing. The next step is to really understand the historic performance of the market, look back at how frequently the market has crashed, and be prepared to expect a crash in your investing lifetime. And the next really important thing to understand is the psychology of investing and the psychology behind money. So it's important to have a really good think about your relationship with money and make a roadmap or a plan to make sure that you are not making rash decisions and that you can ignore external influences and have a carefully laid out investing plan that you are going to follow. The next step is to find a surplus of cash. It's easier said than done, obviously, with the cost of living crisis at the moment, but if there is spaces where you can look to find a surplus of cash that you can start to invest, that is fantastic. And then the next step is to invest in different ETFs or index funds. So ETFs are exchange traded funds, and they simply track a certain market. For example, the S&P 500, which is a very popular ETF, tracks the top 500 companies in the US. So when you're buying that single investment, you are buying a little slice of 500 different companies in the US, those top 500 companies. There are alternatives to investing in the S&P 500. You could invest, for example, in an all-world ETF. I have linked a video here which compares different all-world ETFs. And by doing that, you would be investing in the world, as Andrew Craig says you should be doing in his book, How to Own the World. There are also also some ETFs that have beaten the performance of the S&P 500. However, the S&P 500 has a very long established history, which you can have a look at as part of your learning about the history of investing. But if you did want to check out a video which explores 5 ETFs that have beaten the S&P 500, then I will link that here for you. And then the last and final step is to sit back and watch that money compound over time. And eventually, one day, you might just be rich. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this video. If you found any value in anything that I said, I would love it if you would like this video, or if you fancy subscribing, that would be brilliant. Thank you again for making it to the end of the video, and I wish you all the best. Bye bye.